The paper I'm going to present today is a work that I did with my colleague Digvijay and a former PhD student from IJDIA, Tanu. And we were looking at this very old question of what happens with what is the relationship between production, consumption, and then child nutrition. So the background we all know, and I mean, I don't have to address this audience and talk about how malnutrition is a stubborn problem globally as well as in India. And it seems to persist despite economic growth, lots of initiatives, and there are new challenges also. Pandemic, for example, climate change. And there is a lot of evidence today on what works, but I think all of us have this consensus that there's no one way to do this. You need multiple strategies all working together and not actually counterbalancing each other. You need that synergy to deliver better nutrition. Among the search for strategies, I feel there is this kind of two schools of thought. Not that they disagree, but some people prefer one over the other. So one group essentially focuses on production systems, saying, can we produce what people need, especially in the context of rural malnutrition? If you can self-provision either through livestock, poultry, kitchen gardens, these are ways in which you secure that nutrition that's one pathway. But the others also sort of emphasize that, these markets are very important because production strategies don't work for everyone. It may not be adequate to get you there. So markets must function. So as I said, there's no disagreement, but I think the relative emphasis is one or the other. And actually what we are interested in looking at the conjunction of the two. What happens when there is production, but there are also these markets? Is it obvious what happens? And this whole literature on separability of food production and consumption is a very long research topic in economics. The question is as follows. Supposing I'm a producer come consumer household in a rural area, should I expect my consumption and production to be closely related? The logic is, if markets work perfectly at any time of the year, anything I want to, here I'll just focus on milk. Supposing I want to have milk throughout the year every day, I produce milk also. Now, if markets are functioning perfectly, then I don't care whether I'm drinking the milk I produce or buying in the market, because the market will be, milk will be available in the market at the price I want at any time of the year. Here we say that production and consumption are delinked because my consumption depends more on markets and less on production. So that's called separability. That is, my consumption is not dependent on what I produce. In India, and I'll show you some graphs, in many contexts that may not be the true because markets don't function or markets are very far away. So then you actually have a association between production and consumption. So this paper essentially talks a little bit about that link and in the context of presence of modern value chains or organized buyers of milk. Now, why did we choose dairy? We chose it because we felt it was a perfect commodity to do research. One is there is established evidence that milk consumption is positively associated with heights as well as children's nutritional status. There's also in the Indian context, and this is interesting because this is Verghese Kurian's birth centenary. We started the paper the beginning of the year and finished it at the end of the year. So this goes back to a very old debate in Indian dairy development. When Kurian started Operation Flood, a chief criticism of that was, when you're actually procuring milk from those who produce, you're giving them cash and enriching them monetarily, but it may undermine their own nutrition because they are selling what they would have otherwise consumed. Now, this debate, many people have researched, not much research has gone into it, surprisingly, but existing research suggests that it depends on the context. We don't know what's going to happen, but by and large, everyone said, as long as they are getting income and they know that they have to spend it on good things, it's okay, it's enough. We shouldn't prevent market development for the sake of nutrition. The third goal is from an economist perspective. Supposing milk supposing you study a storable commodity, then when I produce a storable commodity, I have three decisions: consume, sell, or store. Now, in the milk in rural India, this is not a problem. So we don't have to model storage decisions. If you're producing, you either sell it or consume it. Of course, you can share it with your friends and relatives, but that's all you can do. So one dimension is less complicated when you study milk. So that was the reason we selected dairy. So our contribution of the paper, we would say that there's a lot of emerging evidence from sub-Saharan Africa, and there's not much surprisingly on India. And we were actually surprised at how few studies actually looked at this question rigorously. As I said, we are also revisiting this old debate, not just about Operation Flood, but in general, do markets trade away nutrition? It does, unless your income is so large that it compensates for, so the incomes should be there, it should be directed to the right commodities, and the markets must exist to provide the nutrition. So there's this argument that if you have milk sale and you get income, then what am I spending it on? You may be spending it on pulses, fruits, vegetables. That's a good thing. But for that to happen, your incomes must be large enough, and there must be markets that actually bring in pulses, fruits, and vegetables into the village. So these are the kind of complexities that has been debated, and we think this adds evidence to this body of work. The other thing we are trying to do is just opening this box called markets. Your market can be Amul coming and buying, or Arun Hudson Foods coming and buying Arogya milk. So, or it can be the local, in the North India, they say dudhiyas or milk vendors who just come on a bicycle, pick up 2 liters every morning and take it. So we want to characterize it. Usually market means, for economists, it's distance to the big city or something. Now we are saying the type of market may also matter. So that's what we are trying to do. And that's where this idea of duality comes. There is an informal local market. There is a organized market that takes your milk outside the villages to distant consumers, like those of us in the cities. So the data we use is this ICRISAT data set. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It started in the 1975. They started with 6 villages, and they've tracked it periodically with interruptions. And in the mid-90s, they expanded it to 30 villages. And so it covers 8 Indian states. And the richness of this data is 1,300 households are tracked monthly. So, you know, monthly production, consumption, and their sale pattern. And you have prices. So it's a very rich data set that allows us to actually examine the question we are interested in. And one of the interesting features is not only do they ask how much did you sell, they ask who did you sell it to. So you know whether it's organized buyers or informal buyers. These two terms we are using quite casually, so forgive us for that. But we basically say organized are all these dairy cooperatives and private processors who usually have a bulk milk cooler in the village or nearby. And then the informal is any sales to middlemen shops within the village or local sales directly. We are not counting exchange and gifts that they may just share with their neighbors. That we are not counting as a marketing channel. So that we don't account for that. Now, what do we do? First, we want to examine is consumption and production related. Now, if it's related, then you know either markets are not functioning well, or it's possible that the trust in your own production is higher. So very often they find that own production I keep for my own consumption because I don't trust market-based milk. We don't know what adulteration has gone on. And so quality differences can also contribute to this link. But in general, we say the markets are not working if your consumption is very strongly related to production. Now, and then we are looking at heterogeneity. Does it matter the same way for all households or not? I won't go into too much detail. There is also, but I think it's useful for me to highlight that this question of endogeneity arises. I'll talk a little bit about why economists care a lot about it when I actually discuss it. So our first question is, are production and consumption related? Our second question is what we call crowding out effect. So the first crowding out effect we define as, I'm a producer. Now, if I sell more to the organized marketing channel, then do I have lower household consumption? That is, am I selling rather than keeping it for my household consumption. That's crowding out effect one at the level of the producer household. We call them DA households for dairy animal owning households because it's very long and inconvenient to say. We'll just call them DA households. The second crowding out effect, and this is what I said, people have studied this. And existing evidence actually says that if I'm participating in a modern value chain, I actually have more consumption, not just of that product itself, but also of other nutritious products. The rationale is through the income effect. I get enough incomes and my scale is enough that my productivity increases because I'm participating in a modern supply chain. So my overall productivity increases, therefore I have more to consume. I sell a part of it, get cash, and use that cash for other nutritious commodities. That's so far the existing evidence in the Indian dairy context. But we are looking at a crowding out effect too. So we are saying conditioning on household sales. So maybe the household sells it, but now we are trying to see what happens in the larger village context. So supposing I'm a dairy animal household, DA household, selling to organized chains, but I'm in a place where nobody else is selling. Does that matter? And does that matter that in one place, a lot of the milk goes out of the system? So this is more of a kind of a general equilibrium setting where you're looking at the village context as a whole. I'll motivate this with a story. And the reason for this paper actually came from my own field visit. What happens is when modern value players come, they go to places where milk production is generally high. Now they'll set up a bulk molding BMC and a collection center. Now usually collection will happen one time in a day if the volumes in the village are not much. So the evening milking is usually retained for self-consumption. Now when the market gets crowded, that is more and more organized players, the volume of production in the village increases. It's a chicken and egg problem. If the village production is high, more players will come. If more players will come, there's more enthusiasm on the part of dairy households to produce more. When this happens, I saw in my own field work that now they were doing milk collection both times, morning and evening. So we felt that if all the milk is being evacuated from the village, that evening milk that they kept for home consumption, that goes, right? So we started saying, let's look at the scale of operation of these villages. If 90% of your village milk is going out of the village, then surely it may have some nutrition impact. So that's what we were looking at. Then we said, okay, we look at crowding out effect too. And then the third issue is what happens to people who don't own dairy at all? Are they better off or worse off depending on village, whether the village procures a lot of milk or organized footprint is higher or lower? So these are the three questions. I can tell you the answer to everything and we can go and have a second round of coffee, but we as a researcher, I have to tell you how we did it. So I'll just take you through the details. And the story is quite interesting. But I'll just give you a little bit of introduction to the milk markets. One of the advantages of using the VDSA data set is diversity. So if you look at the gray bars, you may not see it very well. That's the proportion of sales, informal sales. And the orange bars are the proportion to formal markets or organized buyers. Why we have put both bars is because they don't add up to 100, because some of it is exchanged or shared in the community. It's a small proportion, but that's why you see both bars. So you see there are villages where only informal buyers are there. At the right-hand corner, it's dominated by organized value chain. So these 30 villages have enough diversity for us to test what we are trying to find out. Profile, I think you need no introduction to that. Very small dairy holders, 1.35 dairy animals is the mean, basically 1 to 2. Annual production is not much. And if you look at the milk consumption per person in liters, that's like, I'll read it out from here. It's like 50.67. This is the annual milk consumption. So if you look at the NIN standards, this is most of them are actually below the recommended daily diets. We are not doing well on child anthropometric measures, whether it's stunting incidence or height for age. These are the standard measures we use. So quite negative, so below the median. Variable by land size, again, if you look at it, this is the average consumption recommended daily allowance, as I said, is 9 liters per capita per month. And this is actually listed in liters per capita per month. You see that in none of the total, either production, of course, goes higher. But if you look at the net availability, and by net availability, we say you produce something, you sell something, what are you left with? So that's your potential consumption. If you look at the production minus sale, the average is actually well below 9. So that's the kind of, that nutrition and dairy is an issue in these areas. And if you look at the household selling milk to formal channels, you see this very clear gradation. The larger you are, small, medium, and large are much more likely to sell to formal milk channels. And this is the idea of duality. We eventually show that the dualism comes from the larger right-hand side group selling to modern value chains. The left-hand side, which is landless, selling to informal, and the informal sales DA households who are on the left, small, marginal or landless, they actually experience no effect of organized value chain players. They are actually inoculated against if you participate in the modern value chains, and if everyone else participate value chain, then it's a problem. But if you're anyway operating in the informal market, you seem to be protected from the spillover effects of modern buyers' presence. So same village, 30 villages, and correct. So how do we test this? So this is a little bit of the statistics of it. I think it's enough. So we have a panel here. We are tracking the same household through time. So what we do is many things that you can say, but these households may be different from these households. That difference goes away because within household, we are saying if higher production, what is their consumption? If higher sales to organized value chains, what is there? So a lot of the concerns we may have about whether we are comparing apples with oranges goes away. I won't go too much into the technical details, but if you look at, we are interested in the relationship between C and P. If your production increases, does C increase? If that theta is 1, that means every liter I produce, I'm consuming. Yeah, if it's 0, that means there's no relation. So our test is actually whether theta equals 0. If it's 0, that means my production and consumption are completely separable. I'm either borrowing milk from others or using markets. And so that's our test. And here is where I want to talk a little bit about economists' worry about endogeneity. Now, what does this measure? It's like a simple correlation. If P goes up, does C go up? If P goes down, does C go down? This is an association. But economists care a lot about causation. Now, if you're saying, I'm going to give everyone a cow, because of which their nutrition will increase, you're in a causal world. You're saying my introduction of the cow will cause consumption to increase. Okay, so so we can do experiments. So we all know the Nobel laureates who did randomized experiments, they would randomly distribute cows, and that randomness means you did not choose to own a cow. Why is choosing to own a cow a problem? Because this equation, I can flip it and say production depends on consumption. That means I want more milk, therefore I buy a cow and keep it. That's very different from me having a cow by chance and me therefore drinking more milk. So this issue is called it's one source of endogeneity. So your theta, that estimate of theta, to truly test whether you've got the right theta, the truth, you have to work harder by saying, I'm finding something that's exogenous, and the possession of a cow was not driven by my desire to consume. So I won't go into any more of this. I'll just take you through the story for the rest of the talk. So the separability, we find our answer is actually they are not separable. Production and consumption are very closely related. So this is the 12 months of the year. If you look at the seasonality, the left hand, so the red line is the production. That's liters per person that's produced in a dairy household. And if you look at the left, it's consumption, which are the bars. So you see this big correlation over time within year seasonal differences. We also do other checks to see whether the number of calves born. So as soon as a calf is born, the milk yield is higher. So you see this big correlation between number of calves that are born and the milk consumption. So our separability result essentially says that they are not separable. If a home that produces more milk also consumes more milk, that's column 1. Okay, and that's, I think it's enough lesson. We also see if people will say, why should we be worried? If in Punjab, you may not have to worry if their consumption basic levels are already high. And the right-hand column says, no, we have given 1 if consumption is less than recommended daily allowance. So we are saying this non-separability is a problem, because then if you don't own a dairy, you may actually not be able to rely on markets and make the recommended dairy allowance. This crowding out effect, the first one essentially FCH, the beta term is the one that we care about. FCH essentially involves a proportion of my milk production I'm giving it to formal milk buyers. So it's the intensity of my exposure to modern value chains. The second one is a little complicated. Beta 3 is what we care about. So what we are saying is, let's take FCH, which is what the household is doing. FCV is the total proportion of milk produced in the village that's going to organized market channel. So that's the what proportion is going. So it's the characteristics of villages that actually sell a lot to organized value chains. We care about beta 3 because we are saying, given that I'm a household that participates, does it matter which village I am in? And so if it's negative, then there is an effect where being in a village where there is all the milk is evacuated by modern chains, I'm actually doing worse. So if beta 3 is negative, then actually there is this spillover effect. Here again, I think I won't go into this in much detail, but what we find is that supposing I'm, let me just go back to this. What we find in the first one, crowding out effect 1, is if I'm a participant in modern value chains, my consumption actually goes up. And that's the traditional finding, that your productivity may increase, you may use better quality inputs to get more milk, and therefore I have more in general and I'm better off. However, if others around me are all selling to the organized value chains, the gains that I make as an individual household selling to modern value chains reverses. So if I'm in a village where everyone is selling, then actually I'm consuming less, much less, whether I'm a participant or not. Okay. So this is the finding, that crowding out effect 1 is not there, but 2 is there. Full evacuation of milk from the village does undermine consumption of dairy owning households. And this is a graphical representation of that. If you look at it, the x-axis has average village share of sales to formal sector. You see up to a point it goes up. As there's more and more integration, more and more formal sector buyers, milk consumption goes up. But there seems to be a threshold after which the green, which are the medium and large dairy owners, as well as marginal and small, actually we should have separated out marginal here, goes down. Whereas for us, we see that the landless continue to be unaffected. So this is a crowding out effect. We are saying that if the household sells milk to the formal channel, the consumption increases by 3.2 liters per capita. But if I'm in a village that actually has more village sales to the formal sector, that is wiped out. In magnitude, you see that it's greater than the improvements associated with me participating in the value chain. So this possible explanation, I motivated it with that. Milk collection, when the centers and they evacuate milk twice a day, it thins local markets and it also crowds out exchange, non-market transfers. So we don't know that for sure, but that's one of our hypotheses. Yeah, so our logic is that you may expand production, but that expansion in production is not benefiting their own households. It's actually going to serve distant consumers. Now, what about non-DA households? So we would think that if I'm a non-dairy household in a village where all milk is going out, then I must suffer more, because I don't even have a cow. But what we are finding is a reverse effect where the non-dairy owners are still preserving and protecting their consumption somehow, which suggests that this village is as if it were two villages. That is one with small dairy owners or non-dairy households, and the large ones who are engaging with sales to the modern sector. So this is what we test. And I won't go into it, but we find that these non-dairy households are completely protected. Their consumption doesn't change much, whether they are in a large village with large dairy buyers or not. I shouldn't say large dairy buyers, large presence of organized buyers or not. And so you see the net buyers of milk on the right. So we try with net buyers of milk, which means they are dependent on the market. And that means that if all milk is evacuated, they must struggle. They are not affected much at all. If you look at the total net buyers, the purchase milk, if you look at that column purchase milk, if you're net buyers, then it actually doesn't go down if you're in general. But the important line is that net buyer interacted with village milk share sales to formal, which is the third line. And there you see no effects at all and higher positive effects for purchase milk. That means their purchases are unaffected, even if they are in villages where the organized milk buying is quite intensive. Then we do that for non-dairy animal owners. We do it for marginal and landless. So we do different things, and everywhere we are getting the same kind of result. There's one more thing we do. Okay. So the summary of findings so far, dairy consumption and production are non-separable. And we also do heterogeneity by land class. I won't go into that, but happy to address it. Now, the households that are participating more intensively in organized milk markets have higher milk consumption. So the crowding out effect one is not there. There's no trade-off between selling and sacrificing own consumption. It seems like they produce enough to cater to both own consumption and markets, but there is crowding out at the village level. In villages with a bigger footprint of organized buyers, dairy animal owning households have lower milk consumption. So the first effect is overturned if you're in a village with very large organized milk buyer presence. Surprisingly, there's no crowding out effects for non-DA households. Now, what does this mean? One thing is to say that the village level production became so large that all the milk that's evacuated is only of a high quality milk, but the low quality market is still there. And that's the dualism that we refer to, so that the high-end consumers or producers are not buying low quality milk. So there's a separation of markets, and the non-dairy households and landless are operating in that informal sector, probably low quality milk. That is one theory that we have. But we can't say that production expanded and benefited all, because one group is being affected and the other is not. And so that's the dualism that we try and test. So we test for segmented dual markets. We are saying that households are operating in different markets, and they operate somewhat independently. And we test this by seeing whether the prices are different. If within a village, the price at which an landless household buys milk is very different from the prices that richer households buy milk, you know that something is, it may reflect quality differences. It could also mean that that quality difference is leading to two different markets. Otherwise, price should be fairly uniform, especially when there's no product differentiation in cities. We know that full fat milk, full cream milk, but that kind of thing is not there in the rural setting. So you would think that this is segmented, and we find, yes, it is true. So yeah, so it's quite nuanced. So we do all of these. This is just to show that we are not making up our story, but we have kind of tried to test it. What is the difference? And you find that based on observable characteristics of the household, production, sale price, purchase price, you see that the last column is the difference, and it is statistically different between those who sell to the formal sector and those who do not sell to the formal sector. This is a very good sign that there is duality. If it's a single market, then you shouldn't find any difference. But on all of these characteristics, we are finding this difference in all of the characteristics of milk markets. The average land operated is also different. The larger farmers tend to sell to farmers, to organized buyers, and the smaller farmers, that's the last row. So your land operated actually begins to matter. And so there's this clear separation between land size, participation in formal markets, and how those formal markets affect different land sizes. You can call it inequality. From a market perspective, we are calling it dualism because we treat it as informal versus formal. The question is, why do you worry so much about consumption? Maybe these are all flushed with milk and everyone is already consuming enough. As I pointed out, it matters. A 1 liter increase in per capita milk production is around 40 milliliters increase in consumption. Now, this is small, but for those who are just below the RDA, it actually makes a difference. And in our sample, only 29% of the large farm households actually met the RDA criterion. So imagine the large farm sizes are the ones who have more herd size, more productivity, all of those correlate, but still consumption is compromised, which is why our story is quite important. So if you develop markets, then you should worry a little bit about what it does to those who are selling to these markets in context where market presence is very large. A final note, we were looking so far at per capita consumption at the household level. The question is, does it also matter for child nutrition? And here we actually take this analysis. This is just showing the relationship between milk consumption as well as child nutrition. We know that milk consumption and child nutrition are correlated. We have shown that organized market presence in the village and milk consumption is correlated. Therefore, you would expect organized milk markets to also affect child nutrition directly. So we then analyze the direct relationship between child nutrition and organized milk market presence, and all of our consumption results go through to stunting, but mostly for 0 to 3 age categories, not so much to 3 to 6. And I think nutritionists, if there are any in the group, will tell us a story about how growth faltering happens in particular ages, and that's more sensitive to inputs. And they say early childhood, dealing with problems in the early childhood is better than late childhood. So that we are still working on making our paper more nutrition sensitive. So I think that's the issue. So now we find exactly the same things. So you don't even need to read this. It mirrors exactly our consumption results. So it's quite robust. So concluding remarks, we do want market development. We don't want to deprive producers of markets, but at the same time, it needs to be nutrition sensitive. You can't assume that as soon as you give organized value chains, the income effect will outweigh everything. We don't know that for sure. So what do we do? It's easy to say it has to be nutrition sensitive. How can you do it? One approach is to say you have organized market presence, do market development, but also ensure that there's food-based support or that milk comes back into the village in some form, either through state schemes or through institutional innovations like markets that actually, if you have a PDS ration shop, if the ration shop also starts selling milk, for example, then you get standardized quality milk back into the rural areas. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions.